So, welcome to our second week of marketing and data analytics. This week, we're going to consider how to look at the marketing environment and which frameworks will be helpful to us. We're also going to start looking at how do we group potential customers together and which ones do we decide to go for. So, let's have a little bit more of a detailed look at what we're going to be going through. So we're going to look at the marketing environment. We're going to use a couple of different frameworks in doing that. We're going to consider how we choose which market to go for and why. We're going to look at how businesses will find out about their customer and how we ensure that we've got a good amount of customers to go for in a particular segment. Then we're going to consider something called targeting. So this is like which group we're going to go for. And once we've decided that, we can create a market position. In other words, that we're really attractive to them. And we do this by considering how to map out our position against our competitors so it's appealing in our customers' mind. In order to do this properly, we need to ensure that we understand the concept of segmenting, targeting, and then positioning our brand. And then we're going to analyse different methods of doing this. So, to start off with, we need to understand the context in which we're operating. And we do this by looking at a couple of different ways to get a complete picture. So we do look outside, so we look externally. So we're looking, in this case, we use PESTLE, so we'll use a framework to look at the political situation. We're going to go on to this a little more as the lecture continues. So we use the PESTLE to consider externally what's going on. And then internally, we need to understand what's the organisation's strategy, what's their culture, so how is it around here, so what's it like to be in that organisation, what resources have they got? Have they got sufficient money? Have they got sufficient intellectual capital? So the individuals working there, the patents, and socio-politically, what's going on there for them? And then we look at the marketplace. So we look at who the customers are, the different agencies available and competitors. We look at the strategies that the players in the market use. We look at the media and the channels that they use and the messages they put out there. And if we do all that together, it's much broader than just looking at the external environment. It gives us what's going on internally, what's going on in the marketplace, and the bigger picture by looking externally. So let's have a little bit of a further look at external frameworks that we can use. So we mentioned here in the previous one, PESTLE, and this is one that we're suggesting that you use for the second assignment. So you're looking at least two elements of it anyway, and the most relevant two elements are worth looking at. So first of all, politically, what's going on? So are there changes in the government? Is this then leading to certain decisions in terms of is there some uncertainty? Is that meaning that people are holding back on buying things? So we look at the political landscape in which we're operating. Economically, what's people's availability of income like? What's the perception of how they're doing? Because actually perception is quite often stronger than reality. Is there potentially an economic downturn? How's that going to impact your organisation that you're looking at? We look at the gross domestic product for a particular country, and we just look at a number of different factors in terms of what's going on in the economy and people's ability to purchase. Socially, and sociologically, what's the trends that are going on? How are people engaging with each other? Is there a shift in terms of consumer behaviour in a certain way? Technology wise, so we're then looking at things to do with the digital marketing, the availability of people using iPads, laptops, tablets in order to engage with brands and look at the communities this is building. Environmentally is actually quite a big factor in terms of purchase decisions. So we look at an organisation's what's going on environmentally, but also an organisation's response to that. And then finally, legally, are there changes going on legally that mean they're going to have to do things differently? In the UK, there was something recently called the introduction of GDPR, and that was about protecting the data rights of individuals and how they're used and giving them their control back. So things like that would have cost organisations a lot of money, and they had to change the way they handled data and the way that they communicated this and marketed to people on their mailing lists. So another tool that we can use is Porter's 5 Forces, and this is used to measure the level of competition within an organisation. And if we just go up to the top here, in Lecture 8 you're going to be looking at specialist databases, which will be particularly helpful to the second assignment, but also could give you some excellent data for the first. So Porter's 5 Forces, what we've got to do, we're looking at what's going on in these 5 different quadrants here, and what's the threats that are to the organisation on each of these. So it helps to assess, well, initially it was used to assess how attractive it was to go into an organisation or a particular industry rather. However, it's also very useful being in that industry to assess what's going on, particularly if it's a fast-changing environment. So first of all, let's consider what threats have we got in terms of substitutes. So these aren't direct competitors, but they're things that people might use instead of what you're offering. So it could be a similar product or it could be an alternative. And actually now people don't necessarily have landlines at home, they just use mobile phones. So things to consider in terms of like if people are going to use substitutes. Is it expensive for them to move to a substitute? If it is, they'll probably stick with your good or service, but even if they don't necessarily want to. If the pricing of the substitute involves quite an investment, again, they're unlikely to move or less likely to move because there's a bigger opportunity cost there. And if it isn't as good as what you offer, then why would they change? Then consider the product quality. So actually, if your competitor's seen as offering a superior quality product, then you're in a difficult position. And as well as quality is the performance. So does it meet their criteria? If that's higher than yours, again, you need to look at actually what you're doing and the customer value you're creating. So an example of a substitute is a tablet instead of a laptop, because people might think, well, actually, I only use it in front of the telly. I just want something that's portable. I don't necessarily need a keyboard, so a tablet's perfect. I don't need to replace my laptop with another laptop. Okay, so that covers the threat of substitutes. Now, how about the threat of new entrants? So it used to be that the bigger the barriers to entry, the less people were concerned about new entrants to the market. So a barrier to entry could come through something like intellectual property. You could have a patent that means that another drugs company can't supply the same products. It could be regulations that means that it's very difficult to set up a business. But the easier it is to set up a business, the more likely you are to have competitors. So if you're creating wax melts, for example, or making t-shirts, the chances of having your barriers to entry are very low because you can set the business up very easily. Economies of scale are where you can actually build, you've got a bigger brand because people have heard of you, so you've got a bigger marketing budget and therefore have a certain level of trust that comes with being recognised. So somewhere like Amazon, Subway, all big brands, and people instantly recognise them and they're top of mind, which is really important. If an industry is seen as quite profitable, then you're likely to get more entrants and people wanting to get into it. But if it's not seen as profitable, then organisations are likely to leave. Governments may engage and interact with organisations to encourage them to enter or leave different markets, depending on whether they serve the public good and what the motivations are there. However, for digital marketing, it's actually quite easy. If you've got a good website, if you've got a good infrastructure behind you technology-wise, then it can make the barriers to entry quite low. So, however, you're unlikely to be able to compete with something like Google or Amazon or eBay because they've got the economies of scale and they're well known and trusted already. So you're likely, if you're a small brand, to only get a niche position. So we've got, after our new entrants, we've got competitors. So these are direct competition. And you might end up competing with yourself, which sounds ridiculous, but actually if you bring out a new product range, are you cannibalizing sales from one product range to another product range? Is it expensive to leave the industry? Have you got to sell certain things? Have you got to wind things up? Have you got to, in which case you're more likely to stay in that business? How much growth is there in that industry? If there's a lot of growth, then businesses will try and evolve quite quickly. But if it's slow, what they'll possibly do is try and buy out their competitors and just become bigger within the industry to benefit from economies of scale. And then finally, digital transformation can give you a huge competitive advantage because the competitors just can't do anything like it. So if you really revolutionise, and that can come from small businesses actually as well that are more agile. The bargaining power of suppliers, so those that supply you, if there aren't very many of them, then that puts you in a worse position. If it costs you money to transfer from one to another, then again, the power lies with the supplier. And it depends how closely as well that you work together with your suppliers and actually if they're instrumental in what you deliver. So you've got supplier power and buyer power. So buyer power are the end customers. So actually, if we've got a number of big customers and we haven't got very many of them, then they're more likely to negotiate with us and we have to give them a good deal because we don't have many alternatives. Again, if this idea of switching costs is the cost from moving from one to another. If it's easy for them to move to someone else, they've got more bargaining power. If they can do it themselves as well, again, they've got more bargaining power. However, another thing that buyers have is access to better quality information now in terms of reviews of what an organisation does, and that they're better equipped to make the right decisions for their organisation. So we've looked a bit at a couple of different models there. So we've looked at, first of all, the context for the organisation, so where we were operating in. We've then considered using a pestle in order to analyse the external forces, and then we've looked at the industry itself and its attractiveness using Porter's 5 forces. So what I'd like us to do now is to move and think about the customers. So we'll see in this diagram here, we've got this concept of segmenting. So segmenting is where we look for similar qualities, characteristics, ways of defining groups of people. So we've got 3 segments here. I mean, just from their shadows, I'm just making up who they could be. But we've got 3 little people, so maybe they are 3 5-year-olds. And perhaps what they've got in common is they're all at the same daycare centre. And they've all got working parents that are professionals. And they all love Peppa Pig. So that's a number of characteristics they've got in common. Then we've got the 3 millennials in the middle. And these 3 millennials are also, they like to consider themselves as being a bit different. The hipsters, they all live in city centres, or they live very close to a city centre. And they've all in their first career outside of education. So they are sort of forming, so they live with their parents still, or they live in flat shares or rented accommodation, which they share, but they're all sort of at a starting point in their lives career wise. And then the third group are 3 business people and professionals. They all earn in excess of £70,000 a year. They all wear a certain type of business dress and have certain attitudes towards formality, and they all work in excess of 70 hours a week. Okay, so we decide we're launching a new energy drink, and we're like, which group do we feel are more likely? But it's an energy drink with sustainable values. So we decide to go for the middle group because they're hipsters, they have an energy drink for breakfast, but they're also keen to consider their sort of social footprint or their environmental footprint. So we decide they're the group that are more likely to consume and to enjoy what we're offering. So then we need to consider how we're going to position what we're doing to appeal to them. So we've gone for one target market here because, of course, it wouldn't be a very good idea to try and get the younger people to drink, or the children to have the energy drink, and the business people possibly have one now and again, but it's far more, they prefer their coffees and more traditional sort of drinks rather than canned drinks. So our positioning involves considering all sorts of different things. It's our product, it's our place, it's our promotion, it's our pricing, it's our brand, it's how we're going to appear in our customer's mind. Now, going back to our target audience, there's something called a bowling alley effect. And what we can do is we can start off with one and then we lead to others. So if we got the one right, we get the hipsters, we may then have a different version that's perhaps more health driven for the business professionals, but also has the benefits of a sort of perking people up, but it's also a little bit more sophisticated. So it doesn't mean we can only ever go for one group. We could go for more than one group, but we might have to adapt our marketing mix and reflect the position might need to change depending on who we go for. So we need to consider, first of all, which variables make up a segment, and we're going to do this very much in our seminar this week. We then need to check that we've got enough people in the segment, and then we decide who we're going to target, and then we check that there are enough of them to make it worthwhile. So segmentation is about dividing a market into groups that respond differently to different types of promotional material. So it has to have people who've got similar needs and wants. So often they'll have similar behaviours, they'll have similar attitudes, they might have the similar age, they might be the same gender, they may have similar incomes. But what you're doing is you're building up a profile that then means you can put them in one sort of segment and they're going to feel attracted to, you can create an attractive marketing mix for them. So it's this process of putting people into groups based on these different variables, as I say, that we'll consider more in the next, in my seminar today. Understanding who is in this group is absolutely vital. Every level of their profile is necessary in order to build a really attractive proposition for them. And a target market is where we choose which ones we're going for, and we create a marketing plan to mean that we attract the buyers in this group. So the next thing we need to do, once we've worked out the segments, which we're going to do in the seminar, we then need to work out who we're going to go for, and they're the focus of the marketing program. So will they want just one single or product service, or are we going to offer it to a couple of different segments, like I mentioned before with the energy drink, where we're going to have to change our product or service according to that. And then whichever way that we're going to go for it, we need to adapt our communication mix to reflect the organisation's resources. So we need to understand how our brands are responding. As a brand, we need to respond to these groups that we're creating. And we need to do that based on how attractive they're going to find what we do and what our strengths are and how they match what they want. So we will pick a target group depending on how much money we've got, so our resources, what access we've got, what image we've already got with that group, and they're all parts of our resources. How variable our product is. So actually, if it's really standardized, it might be that it's good for a fast food audience, or if it's quite variable, it might be more niche, and there might be a bespoking element that appeals more to people who are passionate about what we are providing, or people with a higher level of disposable income to deliver what we're providing. It also depends on the life cycle stage that we've got. So are we trying to appeal to innovators, to early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, or laggards? And actually, depending on that, we'll look at some behavioural and some attitudinal ways in which we'll segment the audience. We'll also look at how the market's changing as well and how variable it is, because it might be that we need to take on more than one target audience. And then we also need to consider what our competitors are doing and how are they doing it, how are they positioned differently to what we do. So, for example, Pepsi Max is very much appealing to a youngish male audience through its colour scheme. So it's black, it's red, it's blue, it's vibrant, it's cheeky personality, and its advertising strategy. Diet Coke, in contrast, also a low-calorie cola, is silver in terms of its cans. It has a very much an italic style font, and it has a female target audience in terms of its advertising, which tends to be a little bit more, very much more female led, esteem led. So they've got different target audiences, but really quite a similar type of product. So our targeting will affect the messages we deliver through our marketing communication, the whole customer experience of what they feel about what we do, our branding, as I mentioned, in terms of Coca-Cola and Pepsi Max, but also the operations, how we actually get the products there, how we actually create them. But if we've got a target audience and a target market, and actually in this seminar, not the seminar, but on Moodle, there is a TED talk about the purpose of targeting. And some people just do not like this idea of grouping an audience together. They feel it's discriminatory to do that. However, it isn't. What happens is you use your resource really wisely because you have a direct conversation with people who are interested in what you're doing. You talk their language, and this allows you to generate and stimulate interest in the business. It also allows you to build in a level of customer loyalty. So actually people want a continued relationship. And through this loyalty, you can have a co-creation, so where you create a community who discuss what you offer and do. And that means you can focus on what you're offering, and you can focus on not just what you're offering, what your audience say about it. You can create steering groups about it, you can create fan groups, you can create all this engagement and all this buzz. So, when you're looking at whether to go for a particular segment, you need to consider how big is a particular audience. So, how much money have they potentially got to spend on your goods or services? Because even if it's a big group, if they can't afford what you're doing, there's no point. So, they need to be profitable enough. So, actually, it could be a small number, but they could have the money to hand. Accessible, so can you actually reach them or not? And if you can reach them, can you serve them? Are they different to other groups? So actually, are they differentiated? And will they appreciate different marketing elements? And then actionable or practical, are we able to attract and serve them? Can we make it happen? And they're all useful criteria to check, actually, have we got the segment right, or do we need to go back to it? Once we've decided on our target audience, we then need to position ourselves, or in other words, make ourselves really attractive to them in their minds relative to our competitors. And this is really important in terms of how our products are perceived by our consumers. So let's have a look here at 3 different bars of chocolate. Okay, so we've got our Tesco's everyday value, which is approximately 30 pence for that bar of chocolate. We then have a Dairy Milk or a Cadbury's chocolate, which is probably around 60 pence for a small bar. And then we have some premium chocolate, which is closer to £4, handmade, beautifully designed, and possibly used for a gift. So our milk chocolate might be something that's used by families. It could be something that's used in cooking or is a little bit of a treat, but it's for those on a limited budget who don't want to spend a lot on their chocolate. Our dairy milk or curly whirlies could be for single people who want a treat-wise item to give themselves a little boost or a little indulgent. Then our more expensive bar could actually be for people who want to give a gift, who want to give something a bit special, that wants to be thoughtful. So they've got different context use, but also they've got different price points, and actually the whole marketing mix is different because they're used in different ways and they're bought by, it could even be the same person. The same person could be buying milk chocolate for their children from everyday value. They could be buying the dairy milk for themselves as a snack 'cause they've had a hard week or a little treat. And then they could be buying the more expensive chocolate for a gift because it's someone's birthday or some sort of celebration. So it isn't always different people, it could be different usage. So another example of positioning here it's the power of brands and what they're known for. So we've got the Lindt chocolate bunnies that are known at Easter, premium price but seen as delicious and a real indulgence and a real treat. Even the gold, the floral elements, the sort of level of design, the little bows, gives the impression a lot of thought's gone into this. It's not going to be cheap. So it's a signal for price as well. But actually this should be based on, again, this could be a gift giving or could be a self gift giving. We've then got Tesla. So Tesla is a very strong brand in terms of the benefits it delivers as an electric product, but in exchange, we know that we will have to pay a premium price, but also there are certain question marks about how the engines are disposed of in terms of if they're sustainable, but also, are we going to have availability of recharging fairly easily? But it's a premium brand and it's a brand where people have a certain perception over people driving it, and there's a certain aspiration to become someone who drives a Tesla. Then we've got our Apple Macs, so they have previously had a reputation for people who liked design. So graphic designers would use those, they'd use Apples, whereas the people who didn't have design function would then use PCs. But actually, Apple has got a more sort of generic audience now in terms of people really embracing and loving the brand. But you'll see here, a brand is a major signal to actually how it's positioned, how expensive it is, how it's perceived in the customer's mind. So one way that we can use of checking out where our brands are seen comparatively to others is called a perceptual map, and it quite literally is a map, and we decide on a couple of different axes and we see where our competitors sit and where we sit. Ideally, we don't do it. Ideally, we get potentially a market research agency that does it for us and gathers perceptions, but the customers never know, or people never know, which brand it's been done for, so there's no bias in it, because that would be most useful. Otherwise, people might not give you a truthful answer. So we've got two axes. The most traditional ones are price and quality, and then we work out where we're going to sit on them. However, there are a lot of organisations. So traditionally, it was high price, good quality, low price, poor quality. However, there are a number of value brands now that are sort of sitting in a different type of position. So actually, Aldi might be lower price but good quality. However, it's lower range, so it's limited lines. So actually, it might not be, you might have quality and product lines as the two variables. So you need to be really careful on picking the right variables for this in order to make it meaningful. But it can be a brilliant way of looking at, is there a lot of competition in a certain area on this map? In which case, is there a meaningful position to our target customers somewhere else? Or should we have completely different target customers to allow us to move where we're at? So they're very good at helping you realise where there's something called a red ocean strategy. So we have a lot of players in a small area, and then we've got a blue ocean strategy, which is a new position on the perceptual map. And it's where there isn't so much competition, but we have to make it work. So if we were looking at the car industry, we've got a number of different cars here, and we could look at different variables in terms of how we're going to assess where they're positioned. So in some perceptual maps for the car industry, I've seen things like whether it's a premium car or whether it's a budget car, whether it's for family use or whether it's more for sort of couples or individuals. So the usage could be one. How environmentally friendly it is could be another one. I'm trying to think what other things. Economical on the road could be one as well. So how cheap is it to run? So we've got a couple of different ones here. So we use this to work out where we're at, we build it from the perception of customers, which I mentioned before. We need to get them to give us the data, because otherwise, if it's just internal, we've got a bias. And it helps us understand where we sit against our competitions. So let's have a look at the option where we see these different brands sitting for the cars. So the parameters they've used are practical versus sporty, and then cheap versus expensive. So it all depends really when you're doing this. What you want to do is you want to think about those target customers again, and actually what are the things that really matter to them in terms of your product range or the company you're looking at product range, because then you can assess it. Are you delivering them, and who else is delivering them? So you can really understand then. The only challenge you've got, or a big challenge I think with perceptual maps, is how do you know? How do you have that knowledge of perceptions? And also, how fluid is it as well? So how much does it change? So one thing that should be fairly consistent is the brand, but even the brand value changes as well. So it's just quite an interesting one, because it's more about the emotional, and it's an irrational thing, perception. It's not necessarily about the benefits delivered, because we're actually looking, when we've got a perception of something behaving in a certain way, we look for evidence to support that. So positioning, it shows the brand's position and the product's position within that brand as well. So it's all very psychological, and it really shows us where we could build a competitive advantage. So going back to my chocolate bars, which I mentioned, I said about 60p, didn't I, for the Cadbury's bar, and then £4 for this handmade bar with all these delicious extra bits. Now, just because a brand is cheaper doesn't necessarily mean it will sell more, because sometimes there's a lack of trust. So the 30p chocolate bar, which I actually buy for my children when we're doing cooking and making things, is fit for purpose. It's actually very nice. We just melt it and have it on fruit and do things like that. If we tried to melt the same volume of Cadbury chocolate, we'd probably be paying about £3 to get the equivalent amount. And I'm not sure the benefit would be worth it. So what I'm getting at is, some people though, if I had guests round and we were doing a sort of chocolate fondue or some sort of special dessert, I think I might feel a little embarrassed if they saw that I had an economy brand of chocolates. I think I'd be happier showing them that I'd got some premium chocolate because I thought they were worth it. So some of it's about level of risk, and we're going to move on to this when we look at branding. So to sum up, when we're considering positioning, we need to know, do we want to be top of the range, so the best in the market, or do we want to be more midpoint or even a value position, which is fine as well? How much service do we want to give around the product, so the service levels? What level of value of money? So in terms of, even people with a lot of money want to feel like they're getting value for money. So they don't want to feel, no one wants to feel like they're being ripped off. So they might have spent a lot of money on a week away on a yacht, but the benefits with it would just blew them away. Reliability, how important is that to your audience? So if you're Poundland selling products, then actually they won't necessarily be perceived as reliable, but that's fine because they're seen as value for money. Attractiveness. So this isn't just about physical appearance, but it's also about how useful it is. Country of origin. So we're considering here that the stereotypes which come with our brands. So if you want to have a product that's perceived as being a premium product, it needs to be engineered in France. In Germany, sorry. France has got a reputation, as has Italy. I think probably more Italy potentially, about design. So if you want something beautifully designed, then we might look for it to have come from Italy. So it's about reinforcing the psychological perceptions that we've got, and we'll consider this in our branding lecture as well. What the brand name means, all that learning that's embedded with it, where it comes from, it identifies the quality, the associations with it, and an indication of price. And then actually, how easily can we distinguish our brand and select it amongst others? So Aldi does quite a lot of what's called passing off. So it pretends its products look very, very similar to branded products. So it's given the impression that it's the same quality, and the brand is a little bit confusing in terms of what whether it is the genuine brand or not. So you have to sort of look quite closely to know that you're not actually buying a Domestos bleach, you're buying Aldi's equivalent. So that was the session today, which very much started with a market analysis. We looked at what's going on, what frameworks can we use, and really what we need you to do is then consider how to populate these in terms of what data and what the data actually means, what data types have we got and where can we find it and how useful is it. We then moved on to looking at consumers and our customers for our service offerings. And we've realised we've got to group them together, but how do we do it? And this is where we'll move on to this in the seminar, which I invite you to join me in. And then from that, we decide which ones to go for. And then we looked at perceptual maps when it comes to positioning. And we're going to continue with positioning later on in the course when we look at marketing mix and communications, because that's a very key part of creating the right impressions in the customer's mind.